The day I met Morning Star, I was running from my own ghosts, running from a life that had crumbled like dry earth between my fingers. I had buried my wife in the spring and sold my homestead in the summer, and by autumn I had nothing left but a horse, a rifle, and a heart full of ash. I thought I understood loneliness. I thought I understood what it meant to be cast aside, to be forgotten by a world that moves on without you. I was wrong. She was 15 years old when her people left her behind. 15, with eyes that had seen too much and a spirit that refused to break. They called her unwanted, a burden, a curse, a girl who brought bad luck to anyone who dared to claim her. They left her at the edge of the territory like you'd leave a sick dog, expecting her to die, expecting the mountains to swallow her whole like they'd swallowed so many others. But the mountains are strange things. They take, yes, they take lives and dreams and sometimes your very sanity, but sometimes, if you're lucky, they give you something back. I found her in a snowstorm that should have killed us both. She was so small against the white, so still, that I almost rode right past her. But something made me stop, some instinct I didn't know I had, some whisper of humanity I thought I'd lost along with everything else. I'm a simple man. I don't believe in fate or destiny or any of those grand words that people use to make sense of the senseless. I believe in what I can see, what I can touch, what I can hold in my hands. And what I saw that day was a girl who had been given up on, a girl who had been told she was worthless, a girl who had been abandoned to die alone. What I found, though, was someone who would teach me more about survival than I ever learned in 35 years of living. What I found was someone who would show me that sometimes the people we're told to leave behind are the ones worth keeping the most. This is the story of how a broken mountain man and an unwanted girl saved each other, and in the process, discovered that being unwanted doesn't mean you're unworthy. The snow came down like the sky was falling apart. I'd been riding for 3 days, heading north because that's where the wind was blowing, because that's where the empty land stretched out like a promise of nothingness. I'd sold my farm in Oregon for $200 and a half-blind horse, packed what little I could carry, and started walking toward the mountains. I didn't have a destination. I didn't have a plan. I just had to get away from the memories. The memories of Mary's face in that hospital bed, her hand growing cold in mine. The way the doctor had looked at me with that practiced sympathy that meant he'd said the same words 1,000 times before. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks, there's nothing more we can do." The words echoed in my head as the wind bit through my coat. I pulled my collar tighter, bent my head against the storm. My horse, I'd named him Rusty because of his color, because I'm not creative with names, plodded along without complaint. He was a good horse, patient and steady. He'd come with the farm, the only thing I'd kept besides my mother's rifle and the locket around my neck that held Mary's picture. I should have found shelter. The snow was getting worse, the kind of thick, wet snow that blinds you and numbs you and makes you forget which way is up. But I couldn't stop. Stopping meant thinking. Stopping meant remembering. So I kept riding, kept pushing through the white curtain, kept believing that if I just kept moving forward, I'd eventually leave the pain behind. That's not how pain works, of course. Pain follows you. It stays with you. It becomes a part of you, like a shadow you can't shake. The wind picked up, howling like a wounded animal. Rusty started to resist, his ears flattening against his head. He was smarter than me, that horse. He knew we needed to find cover. But I was too stubborn, too wrapped up in my own misery to listen. "Come on, boy," I urged, kicking my heels into his sides. "Just a little further." Rusty snorted, his breath coming out in clouds of steam. He didn't want to move, but he obeyed anyway because that's what good horses do. They trust their riders even when their riders are fools. We crested a small rise, and for a moment the wind died down just enough for me to see. The landscape stretched out before me, white and endless and terrifying in its emptiness. There was nothing out here, no trees, no buildings, no sign of civilization. Just snow and more snow, and somewhere beyond it all, the mountains that I'd been heading toward. Then I saw it, a dark shape in the distance, barely visible through the storm. At first I thought it was a rock, maybe a fallen tree. But as I got closer, the shape resolved into something that made my blood run cold. It was a person, lying face down in the snow. I didn't think. I just reacted, digging my heels into Rusty's sides and urging him forward. The horse broke into a reluctant canter, his hooves churning through the deep snow. We reached the fallen figure in less than a minute, and I dismounted before Rusty had even come to a full stop. The snow was up to my knees. I waded through it, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The figure was small, too small to be an adult. A child. A girl, judging by the length of her hair, which had spilled out from under a thin blanket and lay dark against the white snow. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I turned her over. Her face was pale, too pale, with blue tinging her lips and the tips of her fingers. She was wearing a threadbare dress, the kind of thing that offered no protection against a storm like this. No coat, no boots, just thin leather moccasins and that blanket that was little more than rags. She was Apache. I could tell from the features, from the dark hair that fell in tangled waves around her face, from the small, delicate bones that spoke of a people who had lived in these mountains for generations. My first thought was that she was dead, but then her chest moved, a tiny, barely perceptible rise and fall, and I realized she was still alive. Barely. I scooped her up in my arms, surprised by how light she was. She weighed nothing, like a bundle of sticks wrapped in cloth. Her skin was ice cold against my hands, and I could feel her shivering, the faint tremors running through her body like she was trying to shake off the death that was creeping into her bones. "We've got to find shelter," I muttered, more to myself than to her. She couldn't hear me. She was unconscious, lost somewhere deep inside herself, fighting a battle I couldn't see. I carried her back to Rusty, struggling to mount with her in my arms. The horse was patient, standing stock, still as I maneuvered us both into the saddle. I settled the girl in front of me, wrapping my coat around both of us as best I could. She was so small, so fragile, her head lolling against my chest like a broken doll. "Come on, Rusty," I said, my voice hoarse. "Find us someplace safe, please." The horse didn't need to be told twice. He turned and started walking, his pace steady despite the deepening snow. I don't know how long we rode, it could have been minutes or hours. Time had lost all meaning in the white void of the storm. All I knew was the cold, the wind, and the faint, shallow breathing of the girl in my arms. Finally, through the swirling snow, I saw it, a dark opening in the side of a rock formation, barely visible against the white landscape. A cave. Not much of one, maybe, but better than nothing. Rusty carried us right up to the entrance. I slid off the horse, still holding the girl, and stumbled inside. The cave was small, maybe 10 feet deep and just as wide, but it was dry, and the rock walls offered some protection from the wind. I laid the girl down on the stone floor and went back for Rusty, leading him inside as well. He was a good horse. He'd share the shelter. I built a fire. It took forever, my hands so cold I could barely feel them, the wood I'd scavenged damp from the snow. But I got it going eventually, the flames licking at the wood with a hungry desperation that matched my own. The heat spread through the cave slowly, melting the frost from the walls, easing the ache in my bones. I turned my attention to the girl. She was still unconscious, still shivering, her breathing so shallow I had to lean close to make sure she was alive. I stripped off my coat and wrapped it around her, adding my spare shirt for good measure. I needed to get her warm, but I couldn't just put her near the fire. That would shock her system, make things worse. So I gathered her in my arms again, cradling her against my chest, letting my body heat seep into hers. I sat like that for hours, rocking back and forth, murmuring nonsense words that I hoped might reach her somewhere in the darkness. "You're going to be okay," I said. "I've got you, you're safe now." It was a lie, of course. I didn't know if she'd be okay. I didn't know if she'd make it through the night, but I said it anyway because sometimes lies are the only thing we have to hold on to. She woke up around midnight. I was drifting in and out of sleep, exhausted from the day's events. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting long shadows across the cave walls. The storm was still raging outside, the wind howling like a living thing, but inside it was almost peaceful. I felt her stir in my arms, her body tensing. Then her eyes opened, dark eyes, so dark they seemed to swallow the firelight. She stared up at me, her expression unreadable. Fear, I thought, or confusion, or maybe just the blankness of someone who had been pushed beyond the limits of what they could endure. "It's okay," I said, my voice rough with sleep. "You're safe. I found you in the snow." She didn't respond. She just stared at me, her eyes darting around the cave, taking in the fire, the horse, the walls of rock. She was assessing, I realized. She was trying to figure out if I was a threat. I understood that. I'd done the same thing myself many times. When you've been hurt badly, you learn to be careful. You learn to trust no one. "Here," I said, reaching for a canteen I'd filled with melted snow. "Drink this. You need water." She flinched when I moved, but she didn't try to escape. She took the canteen when I offered it, her fingers trembling as she brought it to her lips. She drank slowly, carefully, her eyes never leaving my face. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. "I promise." Something flickered in her eyes. Disbelief maybe, or hope, it was hard to tell. She finished drinking and handed the canteen back. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was barely a whisper, hoarse and cracked from the cold. "Why?" The question hung in the air between us. Why had I saved her? Why had I bothered? It was a fair question. Most people wouldn't have stopped. Most people would have ridden right past, not wanting to get involved, not wanting to take on the burden of a stranger's life. I thought about it for a moment. The honest answer was complicated, too complicated to explain to a half-frozen girl who had almost died. So I gave her something simpler. "Because I couldn't leave you there," I said. "Because no one deserves to die alone in the snow." She looked at me for a long moment, her dark eyes searching mine. Then something shifted in her expression, something I couldn't quite identify. She nodded, a tiny movement that could have meant anything. "Thank you," she said, and then she closed her eyes and went back to sleep. I held her through the night, watching the fire die and the dawn creep in. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world pristine and white like a fresh start. The girl was warmer now, her skin no longer ice cold. She was still weak, still recovering, but she was alive. That was something. I should have taken her to a settlement, I know. I should have found her people, or at least someone who could take care of her. But I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to hand her over to strangers, to trust that they'd treat her right. So I made a choice. I decided to keep her with me. I decided to take her to the mountains, to the cabin I'd been heading toward, the cabin that had been my grandfather's before he died. I decided to try and build something new out of the ashes of my old life. Looking back, I realized that's when my life really started over. That's when I stopped running from the past and started moving toward something else, something better. The girl didn't tell me her name. I didn't ask. For now, she was just a presence in my life, a quiet, watching presence that made the loneliness slightly more bearable. I had no idea back then what she'd become to me. I had no idea that this unwanted child would be the one to save my soul. The first few weeks were hard. The cabin was everything I remembered: rough-hewn logs, a stone fireplace, a bed that creaked with every movement. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It was somewhere to start over. The girl, whose name I still didn't know, was quiet to the point of being invisible. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, never speaking unless spoken to, always watching. I'd catch her staring at me sometimes, her dark eyes filled with something I couldn't read. Wariness mostly, but also curiosity, maybe even a little bit of wonder. I didn't push. I'd learned that about people. You can't force them to open up. You have to wait, to be patient, to let them come to you on their own. And she did eventually, slowly, one tiny step at a time. It started with small things. She'd help me gather firewood, her small hands struggling with logs that were almost as big as she was. She'd watch me cook, her eyes tracking my movements with an intensity that was almost unnerving. One day, I woke up to find her tending the fire, feeding it pieces of wood in a careful, methodical way. "Good," I said, and she looked up at me surprised. "That's good. You're doing it right." She ducked her head, but I saw the tiny smile that played at the corner of her mouth. It was the first time she'd smiled. I started teaching her things then: how to shoot the rifle, how to track animals, how to read the weather and the land. I wasn't a great teacher. I was impatient and rough around the edges, but she was a quick learner. She picked things up faster than anyone I'd ever met. The first time she spoke more than a few words was about 2 months in. She'd been sitting by the fire, staring at the flames, and I was cleaning the rifle. The silence between us was comfortable, companionable. "My name," she said, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it. "It's Morning Star." I looked up surprised. "Morning Star?" She nodded, her dark eyes fixed on the fire. "It was my mother's name for me. She said I was born when the morning star was brightest, on the day the snows began to melt." That was the first thing she'd told me about her family. I was careful not to push. "It's a beautiful name," I said. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Then she looked back at the flames. "They called me something else, after they left." I waited. I knew she'd tell me when she was ready. "Unwanted," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "That's what they called me, that's what I was to them, unwanted." The word hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. I felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at whoever had made her feel that way. What kind of people called a child unwanted? What kind of people left a 15-year-old girl to die in the snow? "That's not true," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "It's not true, Morning Star, you're not unwanted." She looked at me then, her dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You don't know me, you don't know what I did, what I am." "I know what I see," I said. "And what I see is a strong, smart girl who survived a storm that would have killed most people. That doesn't sound unwanted to me. That sounds like someone worth keeping." She stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then the tears came, silent, streaming down her cheeks like rain on a window. She didn't make a sound. She just sat there, crying, her small shoulders shaking with the effort of holding it all in. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't good at comfort, at soft words and gentle touches, but I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's okay," I said. "Let it out, I'm not going anywhere." She cried for a long time. I sat with her, holding her hand, waiting. When she finally stopped, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Thank you," she said again. It was becoming her favorite phrase. And that's when I started to realize that maybe I'd been the one who was saved. Months passed. The snow melted and the mountains came alive with the sounds of spring. I taught Morning Star everything I knew: how to set snares, how to skin a rabbit, how to read the stars. She learned fast, faster than any student I'd ever had. She had a hunger for knowledge, a need to understand the world around her. But she also had pain. Deep, hidden pain that showed itself in small ways. A flinch when I moved too quickly. A nightmare that left her gasping in the dark. A hesitation before she ate, as if she expected the food to be taken away. I watched her struggle. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how, so I did what I could. I gave her space when she needed it. I offered her comfort when she'd accept it. And I never, ever called her unwanted. One night we were sitting on the porch watching the stars. The sky was so clear, so full of light, that it felt like we could reach out and touch them. Morning Star was quiet, her eyes fixed on the heavens. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I said. She nodded. My mother used to say that the stars were the souls of the ancestors, watching over us, guiding us. Is that what you believe? She was quiet for a moment. I don't know what I believe anymore. My people taught me many things, but when they left me, I started to wonder if any of it was true. I didn't have an answer for that. I didn't have answers for much of anything. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever she believed, whatever she'd been through, she deserved better than what she'd gotten. They were wrong to leave you, I said. They were wrong, Morning Star. No matter what they believed, no matter what they thought you'd done, you didn't deserve that. She turned to look at me, her dark eyes shining with tears again. Why do you care? Why does any of this matter to you? I thought about it. About Mary, about the life I'd left behind, about all the reasons I had to be bitter and closed off and cold. But when I looked at this girl, this unwanted girl who had survived against all odds, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been frozen for a long time. Because you matter, I said, because everyone matters, even when the world tells you otherwise. She reached out and took my hand, her fingers cold and small. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. In that moment, the connection between us was enough. We sat there until the stars faded and dawn crept over the mountains, two lost souls finding their way together. Spring turned to summer, and the mountains became a riot of green and wildflowers. The cabin felt less empty now, filled with the sounds of Morning Star's quiet presence. She'd started to come out of her shell, a little bit every day, revealing pieces of herself like a flower slowly opening. I learned that she loved the stars. She'd spend hours on the porch at night, her eyes fixed on the heavens, her lips moving silently in what I assumed were prayers or songs. She never told me what they meant, and I never asked. I learned that she was afraid of horses. It made sense, considering that Rusty was the only horse she'd ever been around. But her fear was deeper than that, rooted in something I couldn't see. She told me once in a whisper that the men who'd left her had been on horseback, that they'd ridden away and never looked back. I learned that she had nightmares, bad ones. I'd wake up sometimes in the middle of the night to hear her screaming, her voice tearing through the silence like a blade. I'd rush to her side, holding her until the shaking stopped, murmuring words of comfort that I wasn't sure she could hear. Tashiai, she'd whisper sometimes, the word meaning nothing to me. Tashiai. It was a name I later learned, her brother's name. He'd been the one who was supposed to take care of her, the one who was supposed to protect her. And then he'd left her just like everyone else. I hated Tashiai. I'd never met him, never would, but I hated him for what he'd done, for leaving his sister behind, for making her feel unwanted. She told me I was a curse, Morning Star said one evening, her voice flat. My brother, he said I brought bad luck, that our mother died because of me. He said the spirits were angry, that I'd angered them somehow. Her mother had died when she was 12. A fever, a sickness that had swept through the village. Morning Star had been the one to find her body, to hold her hand as she passed. You were just a child, I said, my voice fierce. It wasn't your fault, it was never your fault. She looked at me, her eyes dry but hollow. Tell my brother that. Tell the men who left me to die in the snow. Tell the elders who said the spirits demanded sacrifice. Is that what they said? They said the spirits demanded sacrifice. She nodded. They'd been asking for a year, a life for a life, a soul for the earth. My mother's death wasn't enough. They needed more. So they'd chosen her, a 15-year-old girl, unwanted and unloved, to be abandoned in the wilderness, to die alone, to become the earth's dark hunger. Those are lies, I said, my hands shaking with rage. Lies, Morning Star, don't you see? They needed someone to blame, someone to carry their guilt. And they chose you because you were young, because you couldn't fight back. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she did something that surprised me. She laughed. It was a bitter, broken laugh, a sound that held no joy. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't figured it out? I know they blamed me. I know they needed to make someone pay, but it doesn't change what they did. It doesn't change how I feel. How do you feel? She was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching mine. Alone, even with you, even with this cabin and the fire and the food you give me, I feel alone, like there's a hole inside me that can't be filled. I understood that. I'd felt that way ever since Mary died, alone even when people were around, like there was an emptiness inside me that nothing could fill. Maybe, I said slowly, we need to find a way to fill that hole together. She tilted her head, a flicker of something in her eyes. Together. Yeah, I said, together. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how to make the pain go away. But I can promise you one thing, you're not alone anymore, Morning Star, and you never will be again. The months continued, and Morning Star grew stronger. She learned to speak English more fluently, to express herself in ways she hadn't been able to before. She learned to use the rifle, to track animals, to survive in the wilderness that had nearly killed her. She also learned to trust, slowly, tentatively, like a wild animal approaching a hand offering food. One afternoon we were out hunting when she spotted a deer. It was a young buck, a few years old, grazing on the edge of a clearing. Morning Star raised the rifle, her hands steady, her breath even. Breathe, I said quietly. Remember what I taught you. Breathe and wait. She breathed, she waited, and then she took the shot. The buck dropped instantly, a clean kill. Morning Star lowered the rifle, her face pale. Did I do it right? She asked. You did it perfect, I said. Perfect. She smiled then, a real smile, the kind that lit up her whole face. For a moment she looked like the 15-year-old girl she was, full of life and potential and hope. But even in that moment, I saw the shadow in her eyes, the pain that still lingered, like a ghost that wouldn't leave. We cleaned the deer together, working in comfortable silence. As we skinned the animal, Morning Star began to talk. I remember when my father taught me to hunt, she said, her voice soft. He was a patient man, a good teacher. He said I had a gift, that I could see the world in a way others couldn't. What happened to him? She was quiet for a long moment. He died when I was 8, a fever like my mother. By the time I was 12, I'd lost both of them. My brother was the only family I had left, and he blamed me. Your brother was wrong, I said fiercely. You know that, right? I don't know what I know, she said. I've lived in a fog for so long, it's hard to see anything clearly. But I know this much, when you found me in the snow, I was ready to die. I'd given up. And you saved me. You gave me a reason to keep going. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I didn't do much, I said, my voice rough. You did everything, she said. You showed me that I wasn't cursed, that I wasn't unwanted, that I had value. Do you understand what that means to me? To be looked at as someone worth saving. I didn't have words to answer, so I just put my hand on her shoulder and squeezed. We walked back to the cabin in silence, the deer meat packed and ready. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Morning Star was walking beside me, her face turned up toward the fading light. Someday, she said, I want to be strong, strong enough to save someone else, like you saved me. You will be, I said. I know you will. Winter came again, harsher than the last. The snow piled up, and the cold crept into the cabin like a living thing. We were cut off from the world, trapped in our small bubble of warmth and safety. I'd taken to reading to her at night. I had a few books, battered and worn, that had belonged to my grandfather, poetry mostly, and the Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, I'd read, I shall not want. Morning Star would listen, her eyes half closed, her body curled up near the fire. She'd ask questions sometimes about the stories, about the people in them. She was curious about everything. The night of the storm, I woke to find her sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Are you all right? I asked, my voice heavy with sleep. I had a dream, she said, a dream about my brother. I sat up, my heart tightening. What happened in the dream? Nothing, she said. He just looked at me like he always did, like I was worthless. I got up from my bed and went over to her, sitting down beside her by the fire. He was wrong, I said. You're not worthless. You're not unwanted. Don't you see that? Don't you understand what you mean to me? She turned to look at me, her eyes shimmering with tears. Why do you care so much? I've been told my whole life that I'm nothing, that I bring bad luck, that I'm a curse. But you keep saying the opposite. Why? The question hung in the air and I had to think about it. Why did I care so much? Because I saw myself in her, I realized. I saw the pain, the loneliness, the feeling of being abandoned by the world. I saw the reflection of my own grief in her eyes. Because, I said, you remind me of someone I lost, someone I couldn't save, and I guess I need to believe that I can save you, that I can make things right. She stared at me for a long moment, and then she reached out and took my hand. Thank you, she said. Thank you for believing in me. We sat there until the sun came up, two broken people finding healing in each other's company. I was out chopping wood when I saw him, a figure in the distance, riding toward the cabin. My hand tightened on the axe and I felt my heart start to pound. Morning Star was inside doing chores. I called out to her, telling her to stay inside, to lock the door. Then I walked out to meet the visitor. He was Apache, a man in his late 20s, with a face carved from stone and eyes that held no warmth. He rode a gray horse, a fine animal, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being feared. Are you the one who took the girl? He asked, his voice flat. I found her in the snow, I said, my grip tightening on the axe. She was dying, I saved her. He dismounted, his movements smooth and unhurried. He was armed, a knife at his belt, a rifle slung across his back. I knew I was outmatched, but I wasn't about to back down. I am her brother, he said. Tashi, I have come to take her home. I stared at him, the axe heavy in my hands. This was the man who'd left her to die. This was the man who'd called her unwanted. She doesn't want to go with you, I said. His eyes narrowed. You do not speak for my people. You do not know what is best for her. Maybe not, I said, but I know what she told me, about how you left her in the snow to die, about how you said she was a curse. His face didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. That was what had to be done. It was the will of the spirits. Bullshit, I said. You needed someone to blame and you chose her. A 15-year-old girl. You're not a man, Tashi, you're a coward. His hand moved toward his knife. My grip tightened on the axe. Put that down, I said. We can talk about this like men. We have nothing to talk about, he said. You have something that belongs to my people. You will give her back. I won't, I said. She's not yours to take anymore. She made that clear. She doesn't want to go back. Then I will take her by force, he said. You can try. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, every instinct screaming at me to fight or flight. But I stood my ground. Then I heard the door to the cabin open, and Morning Star stepped out. Tashi, she said, her voice cold. He turned to look at her, and for a moment something softened in his eyes. Morning Star, he said, I've come to take you home. I don't have a home, she said. Not with you, not after what you did. You were a sacrifice, he said, his voice hard. You were meant to bring peace to our people, you knew that. I know what you told me, she said. I know you wanted to believe it was true, but it wasn't. It was never true. Tashi's face hardened. You don't understand. I understand everything, Morning Star said. I understand that you were afraid, that you were desperate, that you needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. I was the unwanted one, the one no one would miss. He took a step toward her, and I moved between them, the axe raised. Don't, I said, don't come any closer. Tashi stopped, his eyes fixed on me. You don't know what you're doing, he said. She's cursed. She brings bad luck to everyone around her. Maybe, I said, but she's also the strongest person I know. She survived a storm that would have killed most people. She survived being abandoned. She survived you, and she's not going anywhere with you. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Morning Star and something in his expression changed. Is this what you want? He asked. To stay with this man, this stranger? Yes, she said, her voice steady. He's more family to me than you ever were. Tashiai's face tightened. He looked like he was going to say something else, but then he shook his head and mounted his horse. You will regret this, he said. Both of you, the spirits will not be pleased. The spirits can go to hell, I said. He rode away without looking back. That night I sat on the porch, staring out at the dark mountains. Morning Star came out after a while, sitting down beside me. She was quiet for a long time. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For putting you in danger, she said. He might come back, he might bring others. Let him, I said. He's not taking you anywhere. She looked at me, her eyes glistening. Why do you do that? Why do you keep fighting for me? I thought about it. Because, I said, I believe in you. I believe that you deserve better than what you got, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you again. She reached over and took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. I'm scared, she admitted. Scared of what might happen. Scared that I'll lose everything all over again. You won't lose me, I said. I promise. The stars came out, one by one, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Morning Star stared up at them, her face peaceful. Tashiai used to sit with me like this, she said. When we were children, he'd tell me stories about the stars, about the spirits who lived among them. He was my protector. He was my big brother. He still is, I said. Somewhere in there he still is. He killed that part of himself, she said. When he left me in the snow, I can't forgive him for that. You don't have to, I said. Not yet, maybe never. She nodded, maybe never. We sat in silence, the wind rustling through the trees. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like things might be okay. It was 3 months later, in the middle of the night. I woke to the sound of horses, to the flicker of torches through the cracks in the cabin walls. My heart lurched as I grabbed my rifle and rushed to the window. There were 5 of them, maybe more. Apache men on horseback, their faces painted for war. Tashiai was in the lead, his eyes cold and hard. It's them, I said, turning to Morning Star. Stay back, hide in the cellar. Don't come out no matter what you hear. She grabbed my arm. No, I won't hide, not this time. Morning Star. They came for me, she said, her voice fierce. I can't let you face them alone. I have to do this. Before I could argue, she moved past me and stepped out the door. Tashiai raised his hand and the other riders stopped. Morning Star, he called out. I've come to take you home. This time you will not refuse. You have no right to take me anywhere, she said. I'm not your sister anymore. I'm not your anything. He dismounted, walking toward her. The spirits demand a sacrifice, he said. You were chosen, you have no choice. There's always a choice, she said, and I choose to stay here with the man who saved me. Tashiai's face twisted with anger. Then you will both die. I stepped out of the cabin, the rifle raised. Come any closer and I'll take you down. The girl belongs to us, Tashiai said. You can't protect her forever. I can protect her for as long as I'm alive, I said. He drew his knife, advancing toward me. Morning Star stepped between us, her hands raised. Stop, she said. Tashiai, please, I don't want to fight you. Then don't, he said. Come with me and I will spare his life. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. No, I've spent my whole life being told what to do, being told who I am, being told I'm worthless. I'm done with that. I'm done with you. Tashiai's face darkened. He raised the knife, and I knew that I had only seconds to act. Morning Star, get down, I shouted. She dropped and I fired. The shot caught Tashi in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell to his knees, clutching his arm. The other riders shouted and urged their horses forward. "Stop," I yelled, raising the rifle again. "Next one's a kill shot." The riders hesitated, their eyes darting between me and their fallen leader. Tashi looked up, his face pale with pain. "You've made a grave mistake," he said. "The spirits will not let you go unpunished." "I'll take my chances," I said. The riders withdrew, taking Tashi with them. I stood there, the rifle still raised, my hands shaking until they were out of sight. Morning Star got up, her face pale. You shot him." "He was going to hurt you," I said, my voice hollow. "I know," she said, "and you saved me again." I lowered the rifle and pulled her into an embrace. She hugged me back, her small body trembling. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You already have," I said. "Just by being here, by being alive, that's all I need." The years passed. Morning Star grew up, becoming a strong, capable young woman. She learned to read, to write, to speak with the confidence that had been stripped from her as a child. She became my partner, my friend, the daughter I'd never had. The cabin changed, the wounds healed, the ghosts faded. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Morning Star came out to sit with me on the porch. She was older now, her face weathered by the years, but her eyes still held the same dark fire that I'd seen in the snow. "I've been thinking," she said, "about Tashi, about what happened." "Don't," I said, "don't dwell on the past." "I can't help it," she said. "He was my brother. He made terrible choices, but he was still my brother." "I know," I said, "and I'm sorry for how things turned out." She looked at me, her eyes soft. "You saved me. You gave me a home, a purpose. You made me believe that I wasn't unwanted, that I was worth something." "You are worth something," I said. "You always were." She reached over and took my hand, her fingers warm in mine. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me when no one else did." "I'd do it again," I said, in a heartbeat. We sat in silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The stars started to appear, one by one, scattered across the dark sky like seeds of light. "I love you," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. She turned to look at me, her eyes shining. "I love you too," she said, "more than you'll ever know." And in that moment, I realized that sometimes the people we least expect to save us are the ones who do. Morning Star died in the spring, after a long and peaceful life. I buried her on the hill above the cabin, where she could look out at the mountains she'd grown to love. I carved her name on a piece of wood, and I placed it at the head of her grave. "Morning Star," the inscription read, "unwanted by some, cherished by one, beloved by all who knew her." I visit her grave often, sitting beside the wildflowers that bloom around it. I talk to her sometimes, telling her about the world, about the life we shared. I know she can't hear me, but it makes me feel better anyway. And I think about the day I found her in the snow. I think about the tiny girl who had been cast aside, who had been told she was worthless and unwanted. I think about the woman she became, the strength she found, the hope she gave me when I had none left. They called her unwanted, but they were wrong, they were so wrong. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers by the time I finished writing. The ink had dried on the pages, and my hand was cramping from all the words. But the story was there, all of it, from the storm to the grave, from the loss to the love. And for a while I felt at peace. I felt like I'd honored her, like I'd kept her alive, like she'd never really be gone. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. The sound echoed through the dark mountains, lonely and beautiful. And I thought of Morning Star, of the girl who had taught me to howl at the sky, to show my teeth, to survive. I closed the journal and set it aside. The cabin was cold, the fire dying, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt her presence, warm and steady, like a hand on my shoulder. "Thanks," I whispered into the darkness. Thanks for everything." And I slept, dreaming of stars and snow and the girl who changed my life.